Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the OP Jindal Global University, I would like to welcome you to the third session of the World University Summit 2024 on Universities of the Future, a global partnership for social justice and sustainable development. The theme for this session is Responsible Research, Harnessing Knowledge Resources for Creating Tangible Social Impact. I would like to welcome and introduce the distinguished panelists who have joined us today for this session. We have here with us Professor Jan Martin, who's Vice Chancellor and President at the Deakin University, Professor Tony Travaglione, who's Pro Vice Chancellor of the University of Wollongong, Professor ZLATKO SKRBIS, who's Vice Chancellor and President at the Australian Catholic University, Professor Kripa Shankar, who's Adjunct Professor at Indian Institute of Technology, India, and I, ARPITA GUPTA, who's Dean of Research at the OP Jindal Global University, will be moderating this session. The format of the discussion is as follows. First, we'll briefly introduce the session theme and then invite the panelists to share their thoughts on the theme and related issues in a Q&A format, followed by the audience questions. Research has great potential to create a positive social impact by generating new knowledge and innovative solutions to societal challenges. It is important that research activities align with ethical and legal standards and that they do not cause harm to individuals or communities. This entire process involves commitment to transparency, integrity, and accountability throughout the research process, from the design of the study to the dissemination of findings. Responsible practices can also help to build trust among all the stakeholders. This panel discussion will deliberate on this public good aspect of research. Now I invite our panelists to share their thoughts on the session theme. Professor Martin.
Thank you very much indeed for the introduction, Anna. It's great to be with you. This is a large and complex area, so I'm really just going to have a few sort of bullet point sentences to start with. I think for a university looking at this, the first point I would make is you need to be building the research ecosystem across the university so that you are not only focusing on solving solutions, but that you have sufficient discovery-based research to feed the pipeline of new ideas so that you're generating not just the solutions for now, but the solutions for the next decade. The second point I would make out is social impact covers a very, very wide range of areas, and I think we should embrace that. It can be local change. Your research makes a big difference locally on how a community group manages a local resource. It can be policy change, either at the area of local or state government. I would argue commercial outcomes, starting new companies, building local wealth is absolutely probably one of the most determinants of a high quality social impact. And then clearly there's applied change. Bringing your research into a teacher's classroom, bringing your research into the practice of a nurse on a hospital ward or an engineer in a company. It's not something that's easily measured, but it's actually something we should really, really value. In doing this, I think one of the key things you need to do is to have ways of both asking and answering the right questions. And that starts with really strong community engagement. Often you can characterize the university as being full of solutions in search of ideas and the outside world full of ideas and questions in search of solutions. And part of our job as a university is to act as the marriage broker so that we can actually begin to do that. And I think that is one of the most important pieces in harnessing that, and certainly in my career where I've had the most success in doing this. I think a couple more points to make. Firstly, this isn't just about implementing evidence. It cannot simply be an evidence-based solution to changing the outside world, because the outside world doesn't work like that. We have to make sure that our research and our researchers know all of the tools and their place in changing the outside world. And often in policy, there is frustration because the researcher will sit there and say, well, this is really obvious. The evidence says. It is not always really obvious. And in parliamentary democracies, Our researchers play a role in enhancing society, but so do the elected parliamentarians. And we have to recognise that that doesn't always line up with evidence-based. It might be evidence-informed, but ensuring that our researchers know how to engage and engage effectively with the machinery of change is also an important part of doing this responsibly. And finally, two other things. One, this is always multidisciplinary. So building a framework that brings together multidisciplinary teams. Most technology now, most of the big technology questions, the impediment is not the technology. The impediment is the local environment, the legal framework, the ability of the public to accept change/progress. And finally, you touched on it in your opening, ensuring that your university has the right ethical and infrastructure framework to support the decision-making, to support the engagement. So the guardrails are there for doing this well and doing this responsibly. I could talk for a lot longer, but I think the benefit of this is always in the conversation, so I'll stop at that point.
Thank you, Professor Martin. Professor Travaglione, your thoughts on the theme?
Yes, thank you. And Professor Martin has covered the ground quite extensively, but perhaps one area that I didn't hear him cover, and my apologies, Professor Martin, if you have covered this and I just didn't pick it up, but that is the collaboration area. So if I can give you an example of what the University of Wollongong is doing, where it really emphasises the high levels of collaboration that you require to really be successful in responsible research, then let me give you the example of the Antarctica Treaty. So you'll be familiar, perhaps, that this is a part of the world that a number of nations have really agreed to on how Antarctica will be managed, if that's the right word, by the world and particularly some significant nations. So that's set very much in agreement in terms of collaboration between nations. And we've seen some really significant advancements into Antarctica by countries like China, major investments in building for the future of Antarctica. But in terms of that understanding, that collaboration beyond individual countries working with other countries, there's also the collaboration which is required between one university and another university. Now, they can be obviously national universities or universities operating across borders. So if I give you the example of national universities, so how does the University of Wollongong collaborate across Australia to make success of everything in Antarctica? Typically, the funding for such collaboration occurs through what we call Australian Research Council grants. These are very prestigious grants, level 1 grants that occur. Typically, you get them. The big dollars come from universities working collaboratively with one another. So if you have a look at the ARC project that I'm particularly going to reference during this particular session, it's securing Antarctica's environmental future. If Antarctica does not go well, the rest of the world will not go well because rising sea levels, etc. So to make that work, a whole range of universities are a part of that collaboration. And then again, taking on Professor Martin's comment about cross-disciplinary research, we have engineers involved in this. We have AI experts. We have the tech people. We have maths and stats. We have the environmental science. And then we have law and policy. Because again, as Professor Martin has said, sometimes the technology can be actually pretty easy. It's actually getting the law and the policy and the communities, particularly national communities and international communities, to buy into the particular research. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I would also like to point out the collaborative research project that is ongoing between OP Jindal Global University and Wollongong. This is in the area of microplastics in Indonesia and ocean, and this is DFAT funded funding. So we have actually had multiple collaborative research projects with Wollongong and other universities in Australia. So thank you.
Wonderful,
Professor,
wonderful.
thank you. Professor SKRBIS, your comments.
Yeah, thank you so very much. And look, it's wonderful to be able to build on comments from the two previous colleagues. And look, one of the things that I wanted to highlight is there are probably two kind of themes that emerge out of the title of this session that I would like to reflect upon very briefly. The first one is responsible research, and the second one is tangible social impact. I think it's important for us to say that universities, whether they are privately or publicly funded, have certain responsibility that goes beyond just simply conducting research. So we have a series of social responsibilities. We have a responsibility to serve the greater good, common good, whichever way you describe it. And for me, research in universities is inextricably linked to something bigger, something that transcends us all. Now, in terms of tangible social impact, what I would say by extension of my previous comments, I would say that if universities and research they conduct is really part of something bigger, then research must be impactful, and it must be impactful in a way that we can understand that impact and also measure it. So we have a really important responsibility to contribute to an overall improvement of a betterment of humanity. I mean, I know this sounds big, but I think I'm simply trying to point at the purpose of a modern, engaged, collaborative university that's emerging in this century. So universities have responsibility not just to make things bigger and better or smaller and faster. They also have responsibility to actually improve the understanding of the impact of research that we are conducting, understanding of one another, and understanding of our shared points of departure and points of arrival. Now, it's perhaps not surprising that I'm saying all these things. Our university has a very distinct and clear mission. That is the pursuit of knowledge, the dignity of the human person, and the common good. Now, what we are trying to do really is support flourishing lives, thriving communities, and ethical futures. Now, I can unpack that later, but I would probably say that our unique mission is probably reflected in both Deakin University and Wollongong University's mission. It's part of a contemporary fabric of a modern university, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor SKRBIS. Now we can move on to the moderated Q&A part of the session. Our first question for the panel is, what are some initiatives or programs that your university has implemented to support researchers in conducting responsible research and translating their findings into evidence-based policies and programs? Professor Martin.
I may only touch on a bit of this. I think there's a lot of training support that we now give incoming researchers so that they are supported in the ethical and legal frameworks in which we have to carry out our research. The guardrails are there. There's a lot of sort of very practical day-to-day activities that take place year in, year out, new PhD students coming in, being inducted. So I think every university needs to look at that piece of the responsible research piece. There's a very boring but really important piece around this, around policy and making sure that the framework for data holding, all the other things that we have to do is absolutely right. Let's park the boring stuff. The much more interesting thing is then how do we start to encourage people to work together in this area? And I'm going to pull out one example, which is our Applied Artificial Intelligence Research Institute. Their goal is very much around the ethical and responsible use of AI. They are great AI scientists and engineers, but at the same time, they absolutely understand the power and responsibility that they have thinking about the next generation of application and everything else. And they are now engaging with the law faculty, with the health faculty, with engineering, with some of our government people in the School of Business around how do we do this? Because AI is one of those technologies that almost knows no boundaries, big potential, big hazard. And I think that is one of the great examples where if we do this well, we can play a really good role in the responsible adoption and dissemination of really great research.
Thank you, Professor Martin. Professor Travaglione, your thoughts?
Professor Martin touched on one of the key outcomes of responsible research in his opening address, and that was the building of companies, in a sense, a commercialisation of research. So this is something that a number of Australian universities are really good at. They're particularly good at in terms of if they have almost a goal to transform their local communities. And I'm sure this will resonate with people in India. As a local economy changes, it might have been very reliant on some form of mining in the past, or some form of agriculture, some form of manufacturing. And as that economy changes, and we've seen those changes throughout many cities in the world, there's a need to really conduct research in a way where the innovations of that research are actually going to generate new companies, new technology, and critically important, new employment. So the University of Wollongong, for example, has a proud record to have an iAccelerate unit, which over a very small number of years has been responsible for over 300 companies being created, which then obviously have grown into significant organisations and have created significant employment. So I think that's just really one of the key outcomes. We've always got to look at those outcomes and say, you know, well, where does it all lead to? And as I said, you know, that's one of the key KPIs that you could look at and say, yes, that's got to be an expectation.
Thank you. Professor SKRBIS, your thoughts on the question?
Look, I was really pleased to hear that artificial intelligence was mentioned at the outset, because I think it provides such a great example of the complexity that we are facing in a modern university environment, but also in a modern society. Now, I would like to probably move into slightly different direction, and I know that the notion of community engagement was raised earlier, and I just wanted to say that we at my university, we have the so-called Stakeholder Engaged Scholarship Unit. I know it's not the most attractive title, but the acronym is much better. Now, the reason why I wanted to highlight this is because this unit, the purpose of this unit is to facilitate community partner-initiated research projects that address community needs and desires. And I think what is beautiful and wonderful about this unit is that it really works very closely with community partners to both identify the problem as well as to roll out the solution. Now, I would like to continue to return to this unit, because I think in many ways it does a lot of the things that universities are aspiring to change or influence in a society. So the areas where some of this really excellent work has been done is around employment and support of unemployed policy, in social services, for instance, in modern slavery and building awareness around that. So these are the kinds of areas that have been touched upon through the work of this community, this unit. So it's just another, I suppose, angle or perspective on the issue that you have raised.
That's very interesting, Professor SKRBIS. We are trying the same at our university also to ensure that we have sufficient community outreach locally as well as within other parts of the country. Thank you. So the next question for discussion of the panel is, how does your university engage with stakeholders, including community members, policymakers, and practitioners, to ensure that research questions are relevant and that findings are effectively disseminated and utilized? Professor Martin.
I think it is fair to say that probably no university ever gets this quite perfect, because the network of stakeholders which even a moderately large university engages with is absolutely enormous. But I think we all try and find ways of opening the door to the university so that we're hearing what's going on outside. So we do it through industry advisory boards, and most of our major academic areas have industry advisory boards where those involved academically in the area bring in key industry partners. And by industry, I don't just mean factory type industry. It could be the education industry, the health industry, whatever. So they're bringing that voice into the university. Our professional education programs are going out and talking to practitioners on a very regular basis, education, health, and many other areas. And indeed, in both directions, there's a lot of joint employees that actually help encourage and gain the opportunity. And I could talk more, but I think the final example I will do is building what we call the Future Economy Precinct on our Warm Ponds campus, where we have industry and university co-locating, so that it's not the formal hearing, it's not structured, but you're sharing a cafe, you're sharing research equipment, you have the chance for ad hoc conversations and bumping into people that you wouldn't bump into normally. And that, I think, is actually one of the most powerful bits of finding the way through.
All right. So is it like a lab that we have?
No, it's not like a lab. It's basically a precinct. So it's a mixture of large and small scale industrial areas. We've got 23 bays of medium-sized space for startup companies. We've got space where people share, and those companies work and can use some of the more expensive research kit on the campus that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. So it's more the ecosystem rather than the building.
Right. So it's more like a startup incubation center, not even a center, more than that.
Yeah, it's a whole raft of spaces, but a range of activities all taking place in one area, so that the chance conversations are happening.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor Martin. Professor Travaglione, your thoughts?
Yes. Well, Wollongong is in an unusual situation because as a university, we service fundamentally the community in Australia and our stakeholders from Sydney all the way down to what we call the South Coast of New South Wales. And there's hundreds and hundreds of kilometres over that vast geographical distance, mostly communities that, as I say, are based on the coast. But in addition to whatever those stakeholders require, and they're quite different, you might have agricultural communities in Bega, health issues in cities close to Sydney like Liverpool. We do have a Sydney campus. It's been a very successful Sydney campus over many, many years. But in addition to that, our stakeholders are very much internationally linked through our campuses. So we're very unique that we have a history of over 30 years of operating campuses internationally. So we started with a campus in UAE, in Dubai, 30-something years ago. We've used that successful model to move into a significant engagement in China through our Hong Kong campus. We have Southeast Asia stakeholders, and we get a lot of that knowledge and intelligence through our Malaysian campus. And then we soon will have our Indian campus in Gift City opening up. And with that, we'll obviously understand the South Asian perspective a lot better than we currently do. Certainly our researchers are widely dispersed through India. You gave the example earlier on of how the University of Wollongong is working with your university, and you in particular as a researcher are working with University of Wollongong researchers. But we would certainly hope to leverage that significantly with the opening of our campus in Gift City in July, and our first intake of students in late July, early August.
Thank you, Professor Travaglione. Professor SKRBIS, your thoughts on the question?
What's really interesting is that the question is about how do we make sure that our research questions, our research more broadly is relevant. So what is interesting is that none of us have gone into that, we need to publish in the best journals kind of answer. That's not because that is not important, can I just say. I wouldn't be the Vice Chancellor if I felt that way. But the reality is that we need to do more than just that. So I would make a couple of comments that are, I think, quite relevant. The first one is that our funding bodies actually force us to consider research relevance when we are applying for funding. And that's part of the assessment they make when they are actually awarding funding. So I think we are getting a little bit of help from our funding friends on that front. I would also say that what we are doing internally is making sure that we match the right profile of our research groups with the right kind of partner organizations. So although this is not, I suppose, a perfect matchmaking, it really is an attempt to ensure that all the right parameters are being met to optimize the impact and relevance of the research. Finally, I would like to go back to the notion of precincts, because I think universities are getting much better at building those precincts and ensuring that there is that simplified interface between the industry or end users and our academics. Now, what we are trying to do in Victoria, in Melbourne, is we are developing a health precinct. We've just built and we are just about to launch the only metabolic chamber in the Southern Hemisphere. So any metabolic disease, any researcher working in that area will be welcome in that space. But we are also rubbing shoulders with St. Vincent's Hospital, which is a fairly research-focused Catholic hospital. We are working with orthopedic surgeons just down the road. And so what we are doing is we are putting these parts of the puzzle together in order to do exactly what your question implies, and that is to optimize the capacity of research to be fruitful and impactful.
Thank you, Professor SKRBIS. Our next question for the panel is, how does your university support interdisciplinary collaboration and cross-sector partnerships to address complex societal challenges and promote responsible research practices? Professor Martin.
I think there is a large element for us at the moment that if we are not building an environment that culturally encourages people to work in this space, we will not succeed. Most of the work that we do sits at the boundaries between disciplines, or means that we have to have more than one discipline coming in. And as ZLATKO said earlier, actually, it's probably the hardest thing to do now in the funding world is to get funding for single researcher research, because there is this recognition that the big problems require ever-increasing teams of expertise to come there. So I think the first thing we do is the cultural piece, that this is really important to us. We talk about in our strategic plan, not talking about, oh, we want a research program in physics. It's very much around how do we take technology and make it both ethical and sustainable, which inevitably, by definition, asking a question drives you into multidisciplinary space. So I would argue that the main thing is actually that sense of support culturally, but also I think there is another piece that is probably getting easier, which is to make sure that people see they can build an academic career in a multidisciplinary sense. You wind the clock back 20 years ago, that was really quite hard in quite a large number of disciplines. It is now getting easier, but I think it is important we continue to champion that in the way we think about academic promotion, academic recruitment, so that we actually encourage people to do this. Because sometimes the simple academic measure of the high-ranked journal will push you in a way that doesn't encourage. Again, not saying it's not important, but it's not the only thing.
I completely agree with you. This is a very important point that all of us need to keep in mind when we are making policies. Thank you, Professor Martin. Professor Travaglione, your thoughts?
Yes, obviously staying with the interdisciplinary theme, with the question, certainly any significant research seems these days to involve multidisciplinary teams, and I'm sure most universities have schemes that encourage this. Certainly at Wollongong, we have a scheme called the Global Challenges Scheme. So fundamentally, we look at big issues that we need these multidisciplinary teams to come in on. So one that's quite significant at the moment is developing the circular economy and aligning suitable supply chains for the agri-food systems. So again, you know, there's the technology component of that, but then there's clearly the changing of the hearts and minds of people. And I saw this in play most significantly in Singapore, which, you know, it's a population of 5.7 million people, but it has 2 of the top 10 universities in the world. Quite an amazing achievement. So they're not short of understanding technology. But interesting enough, when it comes to changing behaviour, that's a different situation. So if you have a look at the circular economy, and I've spent the last couple of years in Singapore, so that's why I'd like to talk about this example, because it was quite different from my experiences in Australia. In Australia, the ability to change people's hearts and minds have been done by extensive media campaigns in terms of the circular economy. So this idea of waste and recycling is at the forefront of many Australian minds. I was a little bit taken back, I suppose, in Singapore, such a sophisticated country technologically, but the hearts and minds were not really there when it came to the circular economy. So, you know, plastic bags, for example, are everywhere in Singapore. You get a cup of coffee. When you go to get a cup of coffee in Australia, you bring your own mug, and it's a recyclable mug. You use it again and again and again and again. When you get a cup of coffee in Singapore, no one brings a recyclable mug. They get something and they use it and dispose it after one use. But then it gets a lot worse than that, because when they carry the coffee back to their offices, they don't carry it in their hand. They carry it in a plastic bag, which also gets thrown away. So to me, that was like, forget the technology. Everyone can do the technology associated with a circular economy. How do you win the hearts and minds? And that's where the multidisciplinary teams really come in, because you need those people, the psychologists, the marketing people, the policy people. You need them all to effectively really have an effective circular economy in play. Thank you.
Thank you. Very pertinent point. Circular economy is one of the topmost areas of research in our university. And we are right now focusing from the perspective of the business school, marketing, etc. But it's really, it's a very helpful point that you raised on bringing in other disciplines as well. Thank you. Professor SKRBIS, your thoughts?
Look, Ian mentioned the culture piece, and I think this is probably the most important word one could use when talking about interdisciplinary research. I mean, your question just encouraged me to look up into our vision document. We just launched a new vision earlier today, and interdisciplinarity and commitment to interdisciplinarity is baked into our strategy, into our vision for the next 10 years. And I think the reason it is so is because we do need to be upfront and very vocal about the need for the interdisciplinarity. Most of the challenges that we are confronting require interdisciplinary engagement, but I think it is much easier to recognize that than to actually do it. And so we need to do a lot of culture work, I think, in order to advance on that front. All of us can give you really great examples of where interdisciplinarity works really well. I'll just flag an area that we've been engaged with a big industry player, Microsoft, for a while, and it's likely to result in commercial outcome. And that's really the area of healthy aging and developing digital tools to save time, to release time for carers, because we know that they spend 2 to 3 hours a day just writing notes and reporting. So we are basically trying to find a way of short-circuiting that. And this is why we needed industry partners. We need our health professionals. We need people who are experts in aged care. And of course, we need specialists in IT as well as law, because law is a big component, what you can legally do and what your privacy legislation allows you. So I think that's another great example. But enough of that. I just wanted to flag how that looks like on the ground.
Excellent point. In our university also recently we have established an Office of Interdisciplinary Studies because as you've correctly pointed out, most of the funders, and not just funders, but the problems that we are facing globally can be addressed only from an interdisciplinary perspective, especially with respect to the SDGs. So the next question for the discussion of the panel is, how do you disseminate your research findings effectively to relevant stakeholders, including non-experts, and what strategies do you use to ensure that your findings are accessible and understandable? Professor Martin.
I saw this on the list of questions, and this is actually one of the ones that is hardest to answer because it really is utterly dependent upon the area that you are working in as to the strategy you adopt. I think the strategy that you don't adopt is saying we've published it academically, we've done our job. But I think if you are working in education research, the only way to really disseminate it is through your partner school network so that you are getting in there or working with your Ministry of Education, Department of Education. Same is true for health, the same is true for many areas. For those where it is more commercial, I think we found it both a mixture of our industry advisory boards and just having a very open door to welcome people onto the campus to have the conversations. And not so much from something I've done recently, but something I did in a past life in the bioengineering area, was actually set up a program that forces engineers and clinicians to come together so that you actually are having the conversations in the room. And it comes back to the solution in search of a problem and the problem in search of a solution. And I think those conversations, so there is no one answer to this. Have we got it perfect? No, far from it. And I think it's just one where you just have to keep on working and thinking, how do we do this? But also, how do we value it within the organization? Because our researchers are time poor often. Their discipline will push them into a set of metrics that look towards more academic impact, not social impact. We need to make sure that we are supporting them in doing this bit of the work as well.
Thank you, Professor Martin. Professor Travaglione.
Yes, certainly in addition to what Professor Martin has just communicated, I would add one critical component, and that is show people the money, as they say in the movies. But of course, showing people the money when it comes to the University of Wollongong means walk them through what you actually do as a university. And the best example of this is our displays that we have in terms of our 7-star environmentally sustainable buildings. So we have a research centre at the University of Wollongong, the Smart Buildings Research Centre, and it has been the most significant reason why the Australian National Construction Code in 2023 moved to a 7-star rating for buildings, 7-star. It wasn't that long ago when we talked about 5. So what the University of Wollongong can show its stakeholders, and I can tell you, its stakeholders come from all around the world to see this. They come to see these buildings because not only are they new buildings, but they're refurbished old buildings that can be turned into 7-star. And that's quite an achievement. But you've got to see it. You've got to experience it. Where in extreme climatic conditions, where Australia can get very hot, not quite as hot as some parts of India, but you know, it sort of gets up to that 40s, and you don't need air conditioning. You can sit comfortably. You don't need air conditioning. It also can be quite cool in winter. You don't need heating. So for 365 days, we can show people, you can come into certain buildings where you can be very comfortable. There's no air conditioning on the hot days. There's no heating in the cold days. And people walk away and they go, wow, that's amazing. More so than if you were to give them a journal article. The impact that has is very, very significant. And they take that away and they bring it back to their universities internationally. They bring it back to their companies. So that's a really good example where you can actually physically show people what you're doing.
Thank you. That's an excellent example, a very inspiring example too. Thank you. Professor SKRBIS, your thoughts on dissemination?
For me, this is not a difficult question. For me, this is a question that doesn't have a simple and single answer. And I would probably say, just reflecting on some of the comments that have been made, I do think that if you are undertaking research in partnership with others, then your posture, the way in which you think about the outcome as well as dissemination, gets adapted to that collaborative spirit. So I think providing you remain, I'll use the overused term authentic and true to that kind of collaborative spirit, then the manner in which you communicate outcomes, that is going to kind of emerge through that partnership. So I think it's really important for us to be open about how that looks like, because what may work for one discipline or one problem is certainly not going to work for another discipline or another problem. So being open-ended and confident that your understanding of the nature of the problem, the spirit of collaboration, is probably going to take you to the right kind of solution when it comes to communication of outcomes. I'm not sure, you know, one of the things that we utilize in this context is really, you know, we are thinking about how to use working groups, how to use steering groups, how to use dissemination fora in order to kind of hit the sweet spot. And what that sweet spot is needs to be deliberated upon.
Thank you, Professor SKRBIS. I would want to add another strategy to this, media dissemination perhaps. So academic work, which is dense for people in general to read, perhaps through op-eds, etc., academics can contribute to a wider dissemination of the knowledge that they are creating. Now, we have around 7 minutes left before we conclude the session, so I think we can move into the audience Q&A session. We have received a couple of questions, and perhaps anyone or everyone in the group can answer. The first question is, you raised a very important question with respect to the university faculty and impactful and multidisciplinary research. If a faculty member or in a particular university is not ready with that kind of background, then what solutions do you propose? So I think this question is meant for Professor Martin.
It is a very valid question, particularly if you're... Sorry. I think it's a very interesting question, particularly if you're talking about researchers who are coming from disciplines that have traditionally been more single researchers, so the law world, the ethics world, some of those areas. I think partly it is the cultural signal that this is something we value. It is recognition as we think about what they've done for the university or with the university over a year, that we acknowledge and celebrate that multidisciplinary piece. But it's also getting the right research team leaders who are there to build confidence and capability, people who it's not all about them, it is actually about building team strength. And that's one of the hardest things to do, because the people who do that well are incredibly sought after and really challenging. So there's many things you can do, but it really is building that confidence and linking people into those teams, but also the culture piece. I know it's easy to say, but it is so important that people feel that the university recognizes and celebrates people going out of their discipline area to bring expertise into another area, particularly where that doesn't necessarily bring the same kind of academic impact reward that it would have done if you just stayed in your own discipline.
Thank you, Professor Martin. Professor SKRBIS, any thoughts on this question?
I'll just say one thing, and that is the point that Ian made about building confidence. Now, of course, we would all prefer for each researcher to come as a full package and be keen to both work independently and work in teams and collaboratively. It doesn't happen that way. So I think it's really important for university leadership to ensure that appropriate processes are put in place to support the development of that culture. You cannot just wake up one day and find your academics completely compliant with your desires, of course. So I think it really requires us to work in tandem with researchers and research leadership, and in a supportive fashion in order to achieve that. For each of the universities that I'm aware of, whether they are really high-intensive research universities or less so, we all struggle on that front. It's just the difference is simply in terms of how we struggle and what we do about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor SKRBIS. Professor Travaglione, your thoughts on the question?
Yes, look, I come from what's traditionally been a very individualistic sort of discipline, and that is business. Business academics traditionally could get a lot of their data from big data sets, particularly economists, and they could, go into the latest Bureau of Statistics data. They could pull out the numbers, they can crunch the numbers, and they can write a beautiful article. And it would have significant impact. There would be no question about that. But I've seen the transition of this more individualistic research into more team-based. And I've seen that not only amongst business academics themselves, but clearly leveraging into other disciplines. So, more recently, I've been associated with my previous university with the largest grant a business school ever received in the history of Australian business schools. And of course, compared with the STEM areas, it's tiny. It's only $18 million. You can only build half a lab for that. But in the business area, you know, it's big, it's huge. But it came about because we were able to convince a bank in Australia that as a business school, we could call on all the expertise of business academics, economists, finance, accountants, marketing, supply chain, labour economists, and we could give this bank something that they've never been able to have to argue the positioning of the particular state nationally. So the particular state always felt a little bit ignored on a national scheme, although it produces 50% of the exports of Australia. It's a little bit like the Gujarat region, you know, might only be 6% of the geographic area, but it produces something like 30% of your exports. West Australia was something similar. So being able to pull this multidisciplinary expertise together resulted in the bank writing out a cheque initially of $10 million and then another $8 million. We could not have done that without pulling together that multidisciplinary expertise. And so it was really building the team, the narrative, and asking everyone to not what they could do for themselves, but what they could do for the university. And that got us through. And it was a competitive process. We were competing against, you know, what we'd call a group of 8 university, an elite sort of university. And that the university I was in at that point in time certainly wasn't in that category, but we beat them. And we beat them because we put together a truly multidisciplinary team that was committed to looking at every angle of every problem.
Thank you. What an excellent example to conclude the session with. So since we have reached the end of the session, I would like to conclude it by thanking our distinguished panelists for joining us today and sharing their valuable insights on responsible research and social impact, a topic that is of utmost relevance, not just for academia, but also for the society in general. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Martin. Thank you, Professor SKRBIS. Thank you, Professor Travaglione. Thank you.
Thank you.
The opportunity.